I'm Cyndy Guerrero.
And I'm Tomas Guerrero.
And together we're bringing you voices from around the university
to talk about things that matter to you, our students.
This is RGVoces. Hi there. Welcome to our very first episode of our Q&A session. I know we call it like a listener's request episode. I don't know what, we got to figure out a title for this thing, but essentially it's people.
They'll see the title when they click on the video. It'll be there. We'll have something creative and super amazing.
I hope so.
Listener Q&A.
So, what it is essentially students from around our program. Just for now, we're hoping to get more people. Send us in questions that they have about any sort of general topic that might not have been covered in a previous podcast.
Right.
And so we're going to answer them. We don't have a lot to answer today, but
some of these are pretty. We could talk we could probably have whole episodes just on these questions alone.
For sure.
So if you hear this episode and you're like, oh my god, they kind of touched on something I wanted to ask about, feel free to ask. Leave it in the comments section. Shoot us an email. Whatever way you want to reach out to us. If you're in a 1301 or 1302 class, more than likely your professor has been bugged by us to come talk to us because we're always looking for people to have chats with. Or if you want to have a chat with us as a student, we're more than happy to have a special student-based episode. So we are very open to our audiences. Right. But let's get to the questions.
So what's our first question?
Why? No.
Oh, shit.
No, our first question is, how would I get the audience involved in my work?
Oh, okay.
So this one is kind of open. So in order to kind of focus in what we'll talk about, there's a couple of things that my brain went to, which is, how do I get the audience involved in my work as in research? Like, how do I get an audience? Or how do I get my audience involved in, like, my presentation? So go for it.
I don't know.
I don't know. Why you ask us?
Well, if I were to give any advice, it would probably be a little more general than maybe what we're trying to focus on.
Right.
But I would think this would apply to everything, and it's usually figuring out who your audience is as specifically as you possibly can, and then gearing your rhetorical choices to that audience. So, for example, if you were to be writing a research paper that was talking about social media influence and its effects either positively or negatively, then you would have to pretty much decide, okay, well, who would read my paper and who would be engaged by it more, and what do I need to tell them? What do they need to know? And so maybe you decide younger people need to hear this because they need to know how powerful, influential people can be in the public eye. And so you would say, okay, my audience is, let's say, 18 to 21-year-olds. And then you would decide, well, what kind of impact could I have on them using my words and the subjects that I talk about? And so you would gear that language towards that audience, and you would gear those topics towards that audience, and dismiss anything that you might think would disengage them, or they wouldn't understand, or they wouldn't care for. And you would kind of steer away from the language that would be a little, I guess, I don't know, alienating, is what I want to say. So like maybe really heavy jargon might not help you if your audience wouldn't be interested in that.
Right.
Or a lot of statistical data might not help you if you think your audience would be turned off by that as well. But essentially what you're doing is you're trying to figure out, okay, like these are the people that I'm sharing this information with. How do I do that in order for them to care and get the point of this stuff? Right.
The way I kind of guide my students, I ask them, what kind of effect do you want to have on your audience? And I tend to hear, I want to inform them. And I kind of hesitate to encourage that, because informing somebody doesn't always necessarily help. I can inform you about how bad cigarette smoking is, and you'd be like, oh my god, that's really good information, thank you for informing me, and then you walk out and you have a cigarette. Right? So informing is kind of a byproduct of what you can be doing. So if you think about, okay, so what kind of way do I engage my audience with either the language or the activity they're going to be doing? What can I have them do that'll make a lasting impression that is both potentially entertaining and informative. And usually informative is not even what like the basis of everything, but that whole entertainment or the interaction or whatever it is, that multimodality ends up kind of encompassing all of that. So I usually ask students, what do you want your audience to get, and how do we get them there? And it's so funny because, you know, if I were to ask them, do you guys prefer that I talk for an hour and 15 minutes and show you a PowerPoint slide for an hour and 15 minutes? They go, no. It's like, so why would you do it? And they kind of stop and go, right. Yeah. So you as an audience participant, you know what will get you engaged in something. And that usually means doing something. And so I encourage students to think about, how do you turn your research topic or whatever into something that'll make the audience want to get involved, or how do you make them a participant actively? So I gear them towards creating stuff that, or remixes or whatever it might be, towards an activity that kind of makes the audience interact, and then you kind of reveal, like, here's what I'm getting at. Right. And it becomes this encompassing a thing, as opposed to I give them a pamphlet and I hope they read it.
Right. But it's also entirely situational. Yes,
contextual matters too.
Yes, because you could be in another class where your audience is strictly your professor. Right, because that's what they want to see, and that's how they grade. And
that's true, yeah.
I'm not saying that that's my favorite situation, or I approve of those situations, but it's just a fact of life that there's subjectivity to everything that you do. And it really depends. Yes, it really depends on who your audience is. So all this advice that we're giving is pretty geared towards our concerns and our interests, and we hope that it's what's the word, multidisciplinary, because then you can figure out, like, okay, if my audience is a professor who is very strict, then at least I know that I need to write towards them, or I need to create this thing towards them. That's and true. What they want to see.
It isn't. I mentioned PowerPoint earlier. Like, would you prefer that? And in our class, like, yeah, that's probably not the best approach. But there will be some classes with professors who tell you, I want you to make a PowerPoint about your topic. And in that context, in that situation, yes, don't try to break the rules or you know, go against the grain there. In that situation, yeah, just gear what you're creating towards your audience. But if you have the freedom to do stuff, I normally would prefer people who engage in things that make me interact with them. Right. As opposed to, here's some information, your face, enjoy, learn something. Yeah. Because if that were the way education really worked, my job would be infinitely easier, and I could just throw papers in your face and go, there, you learned. Yeah. But that's not how it works for me.
Right. But essentially the crux of the answer is that's how you get your audience involved. Figure out who your audience is and what they want to see, and then shape your work towards that, whichever way that means, whether it's a little more creative or a little more direct or objective, then that is what you essentially need to do to keep your audience in your mind at all times. Right. Yeah.
And if your audience is, just like a final tidbit, if your audience are people like yourself, what do you like? What would make you want to be involved? Think about yourself as the audience. Like, would I want to sit through a 5-minute presentation of a PowerPoint if I had the option to do anything I wanted, or do I get people to interact with this thing I created? Or, you know, so think about what you would enjoy if you have the freedom to do that in the context that you're creating these projects.
And if your audience is very similar to you.
True. That's true. Don't try to force your interest on other people, especially if it's very nuanced. That tends to work the opposite, where you ostracize your audience. So if that were the case, if you have the opportunity and your audience is your other classmates, take a climate survey. Find out what are some of your interests. Have some general ideas, and then give people surveys. Like, figure things out. There's nothing that says that you can't do that. Right. Unless your professor literally tells you not to do that.
Yeah. So next question?
Next question is, how do I overcome stage fright during presentations?
Okay.
So, you don't.
It's tough. It's essentially practice. It is essentially practice. Yeah. It takes a while, and that's kind of unfortunate because I know you're going to be asked to do a lot of presentations early on in your college career, and especially if you have to take classes that are presentation geared.
Yeah.
I remember I did when I was younger. I took a lot of classes that required presentations, and I hated them because I was interminably shy. But the more I did them, the easier they became.
Right.
And the more that I realized that all the fears that I had were just amplified in my own head, then the easier it became as well. Because that's essentially what you do to yourself. The fear of that presentation gets in your mind, it bounces around, it grows, and then everything that happens within your presentation that might be a slight little hiccup or something that
stutter a
word,
or
whatever it may be, that fright that was in you is telling you, welp, everybody is thinking that you are ridiculous now, and they hate you, and the world's gonna end.
You're gonna get
goodbye.
an F.
Yes.
Why bother?
Yes, but for the most part, I have never been in a situation where an audience has been cruel, intentionally cruel. I don't think that's happened to me since middle school, but I was bullied in middle school, so that's a whole separate issue. Here in college, people are pretty much in the same level, in the same level of trepidation and fear. And so when you're up there, I like to tell my students two things. They're probably thinking, holy hell, I have to go next.
I'm going to be next.
Thank God I'm done. Let me just enjoy this.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I like to tell all my students is you're all in the same boat. Like, you're all going to have to do this. And you'd be surprised, or I hope you're not that surprised that often, about how sympathetic your audience is. I've had students who walk up there and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm shaking, while they're presenting. And everybody in the audience is like, what are you talking about? We don't see you shake. So like you were mentioning earlier, those issues are amplified in your head. So you might feel like you are like hitting a 9.5 earthquake and people are looking at you and they're just waiting to hear you. Right. Remember that you are the master of this presentation. You control this presentation for the whatever amount of time you have. Listeners to this podcast know that I am not immune to flubbing words, unless we've edited out a lot of the stuff that we said. But I flub words all the time in class, on the podcast, and I make mistakes. And if I were to hang up or hang myself like in fear every time I made a mistake, I wouldn't do anything. And one of the things we need to realize is mistakes are how we learn. And like you said, in order to get over this fright of doing presentations, we have to practice. Right. I was the shy kid in class, and now I have classes with up to 25 people in them, and I sometimes forget I'm doing it, like, or not forget that I'm doing it. Like I walk in and I go, "What's my job again?" But like I forget that anxiety. But it didn't go away immediately or overnight. I even during my best presentations, there were some moments where I still felt that fear in my stomach, that nervousness, that anxiety. Right. But then I remembered, people don't know this. I do. Right. I'm going to stand up there. I'm going to use all of my knowledge of this topic to engage them. Right. And that's you kind of remove the power from that fear, and you kind of put it back into your presentation. Right. And that brings up something that I was going to mention also is, the more engaged you are in your own material, the less time you have to think about how nervous you are. That always happened to me when I was giving presentations. I was really, really nervous right before, and then I didn't have time to be nervous like after 5 seconds in, because I had to really remember what it was that I want to say. And I remembered that I cared about this stuff and I wanted to tell them something about it. And so there was no room for me to focus on like, oh, am I shaking? Oh, am I flubbing words? Oh, am I doing this? How do I look? Or whatever. Because I was just too busy trying to get my stuff across. And that even happened in things that are a little less like formal presentations. Like I took 2 acting classes because I was a communications minor with an emphasis in theater, because I wanted to be a film person. And film person. Yes, and so I had to take acting courses, and man, that was pretty nerve-wracking, because it's very emotionally vulnerable.
So I would have to remember that I was going to be busy sharing or being this other character. And so what's the point of being nervous when you have to focus so much on all these other things? And maybe even that would help. Like
I was gonna say,
maybe thinking of yourself as a character at that moment rather than you know?
Yeah. It's not Tomas messing up.
Yeah.
It's
Tomas the presenter.
Tomas the presenter is messing up, and he's the one acting silly and flubbing things, not Tomas the person. I think maybe that's a good mentality to have. And you know, me as a professor or as a teacher, and watching these presentations, I never am looking for the worst parts about your presentation. I'm not looking for how you tripped a little bit or you know, how you're flubbing words. My concern is, what are you doing? Like, and how is it affecting the audience and all that good stuff? Like, how well are you interacting with everybody? If it's an activity, like, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for your mess ups.
Right.
I'm looking for your successes.
Right.
And I've even, like, when I know a student is kind of having a hard time, I encourage them, or I include my voice and I ask a question, or, you know, I help guide them along, because my job isn't to bring you down and break you down. My job is to build you up and help you feel more confident. So I recommend, if you're at a 1301 or 1302 class right now, use these times to mess up. Use these times to learn, to try new things.
Right.
And practice, because it makes a big difference. I mean, obviously, I went from the quiet guy who sat in the back of class and now I teach.
Yeah.
So I never would have thought this would have happened, especially to somebody like myself who was like, no, if I don't have to talk, I'm not going to.
Right. Oh, by the way, there is this resource for you called the Hauser Lab downstairs in the eLabs building that actually does help you with your presentations. They will let you run through your presentation, give you tips. I believe they record it, right? And then they can give you a playback.
I think that's one of the options.
Yeah.
And you could schedule group ones. So even if you have like a group presentation, you can go in there and they will give you feedback on how to make these things more effective. It's another fantastic resource that I think we should take advantage of. For
sure. Because practice is another way to get over stage fright. The more you know your topic, the more confident you'll be in your own presentation.
Right.
Yeah.
Last bit of advice. And so I try to prevent this from happening as much as possible. But there might be situations where this happens. But I prevent students from leaving the room or entering the room while people are presenting. And I also forbid technology. Like, for me, if I see a student grab their phone, I don't care. Yeah. I tend to just stare at them until they stop. Or if I know they're using it for, like, researching something, you know, I appreciate that, and I won't say anything. But I know that as a student presenter, like, if you see somebody reach for their phone, you know, you freeze, and I've seen that happen. Just keep in mind that that's not a reflection on you. No. That is a reflection on that individual. And you shouldn't see that as a moment of you messing up. And if somebody walks in, just try to keep in mind there might be things that might happen outside of your control. Nobody's going to hold those against you. Right. I know I don't. And I know if that interruption happens, I try to kind of, like, intercept that and be like, anyway, I'm sorry. As you were saying, you were talking about this, you know, because I'm actively listening to you. But just keep in mind those things do happen.
Yes. So last question?
Last question. What advice do you have for older students that are either coming back to finish their degree or start their undergraduate studies?
That's a really good question, because we do have a good amount of what they call non-traditional students that maybe have been out of school for a while, or they are starting school not at 18, which is usually the, I want to say cliche age. Right. I think the best advice we could give is just do you, man, because usually my older students are the ones that have a lot more confidence and are a lot more engaged because they know the stakes and they have that life experience that brings a new level of maturity and confidence. And so I think they're already really awesome. And if you're lost with anything, you feel like you need help with anything, then reach out to us as your professors, or take advantage of those resources we have. I think the Promise program would be a really helpful one. Especially if you're like not aware of all the more current resources that are available to you. Yeah. We have this other podcast episode about the Promise program that actually gives a bunch of really great resources to help you figure out how to graduate in 4 years and how to be a successful professional.
Right.
And all those other things. So that would be really, really helpful. I don't know. I think maybe if there are any struggles, it might be with just how things have changed, maybe if they either are returning to school or haven't been in school in a while.
Right.
And that's another thing that can be solved or helped by reaching out to your professors or even just your classmates, like classmates that tend to really appreciate forming groups of support that can help each other out with like, oh, how do I access this? How do I use Blackboard? How do I do this? How do I turn this in? And really all students kind of struggle with that because there's really there's no training section to figuring out how to use Blackboard or email or OneDrive or all these things that we have been using for so many years. Yeah. And now it's second nature to us. But I know for students, if it's not something that they've been engaged with for a long time, then it could be pretty difficult to figure out that interface. Some of these things aren't super user friendly.
No.
And so building that cohort of people with different experiences and different ages and different backgrounds would be very, very beneficial, I would say as well.
I would, to add on to all of that, older students, I think their potential issue, I shouldn't say it is an issue, but their potential issue is, oh, well, I'm much older than these young kids. I'm out of place. That's not true. One of the reasons we're so full of students from this certain age is because of how much more college prep stuff that they have access to. If we were trying to break through those cliches, our whole university would be filled with people of all ages. If we had like this universal accessibility for everyone, and we so appreciate every student, but I know that when I've had older students, I absolutely adore them. They have the life experience. They have the ability to talk to me. Like I don't want to say casually, but they have this very like professional approach to asking me questions, or like forming these support networks. I'm always like, yes, okay, there's a group that I can rely on. So just know that your professors tend to look at you with these lenses of like, okay, I know I can depend on them to ask me a question, because I know younger students tend to kind of be reserved with asking questions versus older students who come in and they go, hey, if I don't know, I need to ask.
Yeah.
And I always appreciate being asked as opposed to not.
Right.
So don't worry about the age gap there. It is a non-issue. And like I said, if anything, we see it as like a positive highlight to knowing like, okay, good, this one class can always depend on these couple of people to ask me questions. Of course, I also hope you model that behavior so that the younger students learn how to do that as well. And that's kind of like why I'm so appreciative of students who are non-traditional.
Right.
So, I mean, if you're listening to this and you're not a UTRGV student, come.
Yeah.
Join. Like there is no limit to your age when it comes to learning.
Right.
We're always learning all the time in everything.
Right.
So why should being at the university be any different? So
right.
My advice is let's do it. Come to class.
Yeah. I think also it would be important to really acknowledge the fact that it might be a little more difficult if a non-traditional student has a job, because usually the older students are the ones that have very heavy jobs,
workloads,
40 hours a week. Sometimes they have children that they're taking care of. So I think we have to be also very mindful of that. And my advice for that would probably be, you probably already have the time management skills necessary, but I would say schedule in relaxation time too, and family time and mental health time, because it can get very overwhelming being in school and going to work at the same time and taking care of a family at the same time.
Yeah.
And it becomes very tempting to let the school go.
Yeah.
Because of course family is number one priority, and then if your job is already providing you, or the thing that's providing you with social like security and financial security, then you can't let go of that.
Right.
So school tends to be the thing that gets sacrificed.
Right.
And not judging, completely understandable.
Absolutely.
It's just a little difficult if school is something that you need to accomplish in order to obtain that thing that you want,
right.
which is a degree and a job that you will love.
And absolutely. And normally, like, if they are in a job that they love,
mm-hmm.
but, you know, they don't have that bachelor's or whatever it is that mm-hmm. they need, it could hold them back, even though they're incredibly qualified. Mm-hmm. And then they think, well, if I have to go to school, I'm not qualified to do some of the stuff there. But that's not true. One of the reasons you go to school is to learn how to adapt to these different situations. And, you know, if a bachelor's is the thing holding you back from being promoted, mm-hmm. you know, what's the worst that can happen? You give it a shot and you still have the same job.
Right.
So yeah, just
reach out.
Yeah.
And be honest with us if you have time management issues or issues with anything. And then, like we said, scheduling that mental health time, because mm-hmm. That would probably be for all students, really, and faculty and staff, everybody here. But I think it would be especially important if your workload and your school load and your family load is really, really heavy.
Yeah.
So yeah, just keep all that in mind, mm-hmm. and you will be successful for sure. There's nothing really all that different about success rates between younger students and older students, or mm-hmm. non-traditional students.
Non-traditional students, yeah.
We're all in this together, trying to get by.
We're all in
this
the same
thing called
boat.
Life. I'm not high, I swear.
So yeah, I think we've covered everything.
So those are the questions we've got so far. We would love to have more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like we said, leave them in the comments. Email us. Right. Tell your professors you have questions, and they'll pass them along to us.
If you'd like to join us, please let us know in advance. We do have like a sign up going. There are some days where we can, some days where we can't.
Right.
But just let us know, and we'll try to work a way to kind of have a session with you. So if you'd like to come on the podcast, if you want to talk about a special nuanced topic, just let us know, and we'll figure out how we can put it together.
Which would probably look really good on your CV, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, right? These are published. It's something digital that exists now that you could show off to future employers too.
Incentive.
Yeah.
Yay.
All right.
Okay. Well, thanks, y'all.
Thank you, everybody. Send us your questions. Bye.
Bye.